40 partners watched him tear me apart over a glass of Chardonnay in the Hamptons. He thought my silence meant surrender. He didn't notice my coffee cup was still steady, or that my thumb had already opened a contact saved as M. My name is Jocelyn Hale. I'm 34. And on the first Friday of August, I was standing on a teak deck in East Hampton, holding a cup of coffee that cost more than most people's lunch, listening to a man in $400 boat shoes explain to 40 partners why I was the reason our fund was underperforming its potential. His name was Brian Whitaker, COO of Halberd Capital Partners, a mid-tier private equity shop with offices on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in Midtown, and just enough AUM, $4.3 billion last I checked the deck, to make its leadership believe they belonged in the room with Blackstone. Brian did not belong in any room with Blackstone. Brian belonged in a fraternity basement in 1998, which is roughly where his management style had calcified. But Brian had a Wharton MBA, a wife who ran a charity gala in Greenwich, and the unshakable confidence of a man who had never once in his entire life been told no by anyone who mattered. I was his head of compliance. The retreat had been Brian's idea, a leadership immersion weekend at a $38,000 a night beach house on Lily Pond Lane, paid for, I happen to know, out of an operating line that was supposed to fund the third-party audit my team had been begging for since March. 40 partners, MDs, and senior associates, most of them men, most of them halfway through their second glass of wine by 4 in the afternoon. The light off the Atlantic was that particular humid August gold that makes everyone look 10 years younger and twice as wealthy. I was wearing a cream silk blouse and tailored trousers, and the small pearl studs my mother gave me when I made director. I had been at Halberd for 6 years. I had not raised my voice once. Brian raised his. Jocelyn, he said, the way you'd say the name of a dog that had peed on a rug. Why don't you stand up and tell everyone here what your team has been doing for the last quarter? Because from where I'm sitting, all I see is a compliance department that says no to revenue. 40 heads turned. The deck went quiet enough to hear the ice settle in his glass. I stood up. I'd been standing up to men like Brian since I was a first-year associate at Sullivan and Cromwell. And the trick, the only trick, is to keep your hands visible and your voice exactly one notch below his. Happy to, I said. In Q2, my team flagged 3 transactions that would have triggered SEC inquiry under Rule 206-47. We restructured them. We saved the firm an estimated $12 million in potential penalties. The Q2 compliance report is in everyone's data room. I assume you've read it. He hadn't read it? I knew he hadn't read it because I had built the data room myself, and the access logs were the kind of thing a head of compliance checks the way other people check the weather. Brian smiled the smile of a man who has just realized the room is watching and is going to double down rather than fold. See, that's the problem. You think compliance is the business. Compliance is a cost center. You're a cost center, Jocelyn. And the partners in this room? He gestured. Expansive, generous, drunk. They make money. You spend it. So when you walk into a meeting and tell Richard he can't structure a deal the way he wants to structure it, what you're really doing is taking money out of these men's pockets, out of their kids' college funds. He paused for the laugh. He got it. From maybe 12 of the 40. The other 28 were looking at their shoes, or at me, or at the horizon, very carefully not looking at anything else. Richard was Richard Voss, our CEO. Richard was sitting 6 feet to Brian's left in a linen shirt unbuttoned 1 button too far, swirling a glass of something amber, watching me the way a man watches a tennis match he has already bet on. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Brian was a weapon, and Richard had pointed him. I took a sip of coffee. It was, in fact, still hot. The cup was still steady. I have very good hands. I always have. Brian, I said, I think we can continue this conversation Monday in the office with HR present. I'd hate for anyone here to feel uncomfortable. Oh, sit down, Jocelyn. Nobody's uncomfortable. We're having a conversation. This is what leadership looks like. You wanted to be at the senior table. This is the senior table. Don't get sensitive on me now. There it was. Sensitive. The word men like Brian use the way priests use witch. Once it lands on you, anything you say next becomes evidence of it. I sat down, slowly. I crossed my legs. I set the coffee on the teak table beside me, exactly in the center of a napkin, because I knew at least 3 people were filming on their phones and I wanted the napkin in the frame. Detail matters. Detail has always mattered. What Brian did not know, what Richard, swirling his drink, did not know, was that for 14 months I had been keeping a separate file. Not a complaint file, not a grievance file, a file. 340 pages of it, encrypted, backed up in 2 cloud locations and 1 physical drive in a safe deposit box at a Chase branch on Madison Avenue. Wire instructions Brian had asked me to look the other way on in February. A side letter to an LP that Richard had signed without board approval in April. A consulting invoice for $1.4 million paid to an entity in Delaware whose sole director, according to the state filing I had pulled at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday in May, was Brian Whitaker's college roommate. I was not building a case, I was building an invoice. And the contact in my phone, the one labeled simply M, was Marcus Reyes, a friend from my Sullivan and Cromwell days, who 2 years ago had moved to a different kind of practice. He worked now out of an office at 26 Federal Plaza. The FBI's white-collar division does not advertise its phone numbers, but it does answer when the right person calls from the right number with the right kind of file already attached to the email she sent at 4:47 that afternoon from the bathroom of a 38,000 a night beach house while Brian was still on his second monologue. Across the deck, Brian was laughing now, the joke already moving on. Richard caught my eye. He raised his glass, almost imperceptibly. A toast. A taunt. Welcome to the senior table. I raised my coffee back and smiled, the way my mother taught me to smile at men who were about to find out they had misjudged the room. Somewhere in Manhattan, in a windowless office on the 23rd floor of a federal building, my email had just arrived in the inbox of someone who, unlike Brian, had read every word. The SUV was a Suburban, black on black, plates that did not match any car service I had ever used. The driver was a woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her head and the kind of posture you only get from 20 years in the military. She did not say her name. She said, "Ms. Hale, Ms. Vance asked me to bring you to a different address than the one on the card. 45th and Park has reporters in the lobby as of 40 minutes ago. We're going to the Carlisle. She'll meet you in the suite." I got in. I did not ask how reporters had ended up in the lobby of Walktel at 4:30 on a Monday afternoon. Reporters did not end up in Walktel lobbies by accident. Reporters ended up in Walktel lobbies because somebody had picked up a phone, and the only people with motive to pick up that particular phone were people who wanted Halberd Capital Partners to be on the front of tomorrow's Bloomberg terminal before Halberd Capital Partners had finished drafting its response. That somebody, I understood with a quiet, small click in the back of my head, was almost certainly Eleanor Vance. Eleanor was already in the suite when I arrived. Suite 31, 2 bedrooms, a sitting room with a baby grand piano nobody had ever played, and Eleanor in a charcoal Carolina Herrera dress and bare feet, because she had kicked off her heels in the doorway. She was on the phone. She held up one finger to me, mouthed 2 minutes, and continued saying things into a Bluetooth earpiece that included the phrases standstill agreement, tolling letter, and Tuesday's filing window. I sat on the sofa. There was a tray of crudités on the coffee table. I ate a carrot. I had not realized how hungry I still was. Eleanor hung up. She sat down opposite me. She crossed her legs. She looked at me for a long moment, the way a sculptor looks at a block of marble that has just been delivered. "Jocelyn, 3 things in order. First, at 5:14 p.m., approximately 20 minutes from now, the SEC will file a formal Wells notice naming Brian Whitaker as the subject of an enforcement action. It will not name Richard, yet. Second, at 5:45 p.m., the Wall Street Journal will publish a story by Annika Patel that does not name you, but does describe, in some detail, a senior compliance officer at a Midtown private equity firm whose internal flags were systematically overridden. The story is, to use a technical term, devastating. The Halberd PR team is, as we speak, drafting 4 versions of a statement, none of which will work, because there is no version of this statement that works. Third, she paused and reached into a portfolio on the cushion beside her and slid a single sheet across the coffee table. At approximately 2:40 this afternoon, while you were eating a sandwich on 6th Avenue, Chubb Insurance, who underwrites Halberd's D&O policy, issued a reservation of rights letter. They are not yet refusing to defend Brian, but they are reserving the right to. Do you understand what that means? It means Brian's personal lawyers are now Brian's personal lawyers. Halberd isn't paying for them anymore. Halberd was never going to pay for them very long. But yes, as of approximately 90 minutes from now, Brian Whitaker is going to discover that the 400-hour Skadden partner he assumed would be his shield for the next 3 years is going to send him a retainer letter for $750,000 by close of business tomorrow, and Brian Whitaker does not have $750,000 in liquid assets because Brian Whitaker has for some years been living on a runway that depends on Halberd carry distributions that are about to be frozen by the same enforcement action that just named him. Brian Whitaker is at this exact moment the most expensive man in Manhattan, and he does not know it yet. I looked at the sheet of paper. The reservation of rights letter. It was short. 2 paragraphs. Insurers, like surgeons, do their cruelest work in the shortest documents. What about Richard? I said. Eleanor smiled very slightly. Richard is the interesting question. Richard has spent the last 11 years making sure his name is not on anything. Richard signs nothing. Richard emails nothing of substance. Richard's fingerprints are on paper, almost surgically absent, which is in any white-collar enforcement environment the single most suspicious posture a CEO can adopt. She took a sip of water. Marcus's people are not stupid. They have been triangulating for 11 months on a different file, and that file gave them the shape of the room before they ever knew you were in it. They know what Richard looks like in negative space. What they have been waiting for is a single document, or one that puts him in a room he claims he wasn't in, on a date he claims he doesn't remember, with a person he claims he doesn't know. Do you happen to have such a document, Jocelyn? I did not answer immediately. I was thinking. There is a folder in my mind that I keep closed during business hours, and I was opening it now, slowly, page by page. There's a side letter, I said. April. To an LP, a family office in Boston, the one that manages money for the Pemberton estate. The letter modifies the management fee structure in a way that benefits Halberd by about $8.6 million over the life of the fund. The letter is dated April 11th. Richard's signature is on it. I know because I key punched it into our document management system on April 12th at 6:47 a.m. and noted it required board approval per the LPA. It never went to the board. I flagged it to David. David told me Richard had verbal authorization from the Pemberton trustee. I asked for a written confirmation. I never received one. I paused. And here's the part Richard does not know. The Pemberton trustee died in March. He died on March 28th. The letter is dated April 11th. Richard signed a side letter authorizing a fee modification with a man who had been dead for 14 days. Eleanor did not move. She did not blink. After a moment, she set down her water glass very carefully on the coaster, exactly in the center, exactly square. Jocelyn. Yes. Did you at any point mention this fact to anyone? I mentioned to David on April 14th that I had not been able to reach the Pemberton trustee for written confirmation. I did not mention that he was deceased. I did not, at the time, know he was deceased. I learned that on May 2nd when I pulled the trust's annual filing for an unrelated reason and saw the successor trustee listed. And you did not raise it then? No. Why not? I looked at her. Because at that point, Eleanor, I had been at Halberd for 5.5 years. I had watched 4 colleagues be walked out of the building between 2021 and 2024 for raising things smaller than that. I had a mortgage on a 1-bedroom on West 78th Street. I had a mother in Florida on Medicare and a father with early Parkinson's. I did the boring correct thing, which was, I documented it. I made a copy. I put the copy in a safe deposit box. And I waited for the day someone with subpoena power asked me the right question. Eleanor closed her eyes the same way David had closed his eyes that afternoon. For 1 second, the long exhale of a person who has been told their plane has in fact landed. Jocelyn. She opened her eyes. Marcus is going to ask you that question at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. I will be in the room. You will answer it truthfully and in full. After you answer it, the file on Richard Voss stops being a question and becomes a fact pattern. Do you understand what that means for you personally? It means I am not going back to that office on Wednesday. You are not going back to that office, full stop. You are also not, in any practical sense, going to be the head of compliance at Halberd Capital Partners as of approximately Friday, because Halberd Capital Partners is not, in its present form, going to exist as of approximately Friday. You will, however, be a protected whistleblower under SOX Section 806 and Dodd-Frank Section 922, with a credible claim to a recovery award that, on the numbers I'm looking at, will probably be in the high seven figures and could touch eight. We will have that conversation in detail next week. Tonight, you are going to stay in this hotel, in the second bedroom, because there is a real and not insignificant chance that Brian Whitaker, having received the worst news of his life sometime in the next 4 hours, will do something stupid. Stupid in the legal sense, not the physical sense. We are not afraid for your safety. We are afraid that he will call you. You will not answer. Your phone, in fact, is going to stay in that drawer over there until tomorrow morning. I nodded. I stood up. I went to the drawer. I put the phone in the drawer. I closed the drawer. When I turned back, Eleanor was watching me with an expression I could not entirely read. Something in the neighborhood of respect, with an edge of something else. Something that, after a moment, I recognized as the particular fondness one professional develops for another professional when they realize that the work has, finally, met its match. There is one more thing, she said. I did not want to tell you this in the car. At 4:47 p.m. today, while you were riding the elevator down to the lobby, Brian Whitaker walked into Richard Voss's office without an appointment. Richard's assistant, who is on our side for reasons I will explain to you another day, has confirmed the following exchange. Brian said, "We need to make her go away." Richard said, "She has already gone away. The problem is what she took with her." Brian said, "Then we need to make sure what she took with her does not exist." Richard said, "And Jocelyn, this is the sentence we have been waiting for." Richard said, "Brian, sit down. You are about to do something I cannot help you with." I stood very still in the middle of the Carlyle suite. The light through the heavy curtains was the gold of a Manhattan late afternoon, the gold that makes everyone look 10 years younger and twice as wealthy. I did not feel 10 years younger. I felt my exact age and weight and the precise number of footsteps I'd walked since 9:14 a.m. on Friday. "What does that mean?" I said. Richard's sentence. What does that mean for Richard? Eleanor smiled, fully this time. It was not a kind smile. It was not an unkind smile. It was the smile of a woman who has been doing this work for 30 years and has just heard with her own ears via a third party the precise sentence that turns a CEO from a witness into a target. "It means," she said, "that Richard Voss just understood, exactly 4 hours after you did, that he is not the smartest person in his own building. And tomorrow morning at approximately 9:15, Marcus and I are going to spend 40 minutes explaining to him exactly how much that misunderstanding is going to cost him." She picked up the room service menu. "Now, order something. You have a long week ahead of you." I ordered the roast chicken. I ate it sitting on the floor of the Carlyle suite with my back against the sofa, because after 11 hours of holding my spine in exactly the right shape for exactly the right rooms, the floor was the only surface my body still recognized as honest. Eleanor ate a Caesar salad at the desk and pretended not to notice. Outside the heavy curtains, Manhattan was doing what Manhattan does on a Monday in August at 9 p.m. Going on, indifferent, beautiful, expensive. At 9:47 p.m., Eleanor's phone buzzed. She read the screen. She set the phone down. She said very mildly, "Brian Whitaker has just been arrested at LaGuardia attempting to board a private charter to Cabo San Lucas. The charter was booked at 6:12 p.m. under his brother's name. His brother, as we have established, is a sommelier in Sonoma and was at 6:12 p.m. pouring a 2019 Sea Smoke Pinot for a table of four. Marcus's people met Brian at the FBO. I put down my fork. What does Richard know? As of approximately 10 minutes ago, Richard knows that his COO is in federal custody, that his general counsel has retained personal counsel, and that the Wall Street Journal has published its story with a print edition headline that uses the word unraveling. Richard is at this moment in his apartment on Fifth Avenue, alone. His wife is in Greenwich. His children are at Hotchkiss. His phone is ringing. He is not answering it. I nodded. I picked up the fork. I finished the chicken. I went to bed in the second bedroom and slept, against every reasonable expectation, for 9.5 hours. Tuesday morning, 9:04 a.m. Marcus Reyes's office at 26 Federal Plaza is exactly as windowless as I remembered. He had 3 colleagues with him, a woman in her 40s with a federal prosecutor haircut, and 2 men who introduced themselves and then said nothing for the next 4 hours. Eleanor sat beside me. I told them about the Pemberton side letter. I told them everything. I had brought from the safe deposit box at the Chase branch on Madison a manila folder. I slid it across the table. They opened it. They did not, for a very long time, speak. At 1:47 p.m., we broke for lunch. Marcus walked me to the elevator. Jocelyn. Marcus. You realize the side letter is not the largest thing in that folder. You realize the wire diagram on page 61 is. The one connecting the Delaware entity to the family office in Boston to the consulting invoice to the Cayman correspondent account. I realize. That diagram is the case. That diagram is going to indict, by my count, 4 people, 2 of whom you have never met, 2 of whom are not at Halberd, 1 of whom is on the board of a major regional bank. I am telling you this not to alarm you. I am telling you this so that in 6 weeks, when you read the press release, you will understand that you did not stumble into something small. Marcus? Yes? I never thought I had. He smiled, fully, for the first time since Reed Street. He pressed the elevator button for me. He said, "Go eat. Eleanor is paying." The next 5 weeks are, in memory, a sequence of rooms. Eleanor's office at Wachtell, a conference room at the SEC's regional headquarters on Brookfield Place, a deposition room in a Wachtell satellite suite on Park Avenue, a small, almost domestic room in a brownstone in Murray Hill that Marcus used for witness preparation. I gave testimony in 3 of them. I signed documents in all of them. I wore the same charcoal theory suit 3 times, because by week 2, I had stopped pretending that what I wore mattered to anyone in those rooms. On September 4th, the SEC filed a civil enforcement action naming Richard Voss, Brian Whitaker, and 2 outside parties whose names were not, at that point, public. The action alleged a coordinated scheme to extract approximately $61 million in unauthorized fees and side payments over a period of 31 months. On September 5th, the Journal ran the follow-up. This one with my name in the 11th paragraph, described as a senior compliance officer whose internal warnings, according to the complaint, were systematically suppressed. I read it standing in line at a coffee shop on the Upper West Side. The woman behind me, who could not possibly have known, said, "Excuse me, are you going to order?" I ordered. I paid. I walked out into the September morning. The air had the first thread of fall in it, the thread that always arrives in the second week of September in Manhattan, whether anyone has earned it or not. On September 18th, Halberd Capital Partners filed for dissolution. The remaining assets were placed into a court-supervised wind-down. The 4 LPs Eleanor had been quietly representing were made whole. The other LPs took a haircut of, on average, 11 cents on the dollar. Better than they had any right to expect, worse than anyone had hoped. On September 22nd, Brian Whitaker pled guilty to 3 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of false statements to federal investigators. His sentencing was scheduled for the following March. His Skadden lawyers had, as Eleanor predicted, withdrawn from the matter on August 14th. He was represented at the plea hearing by a court-appointed federal defender, a woman in her early 30s who I was told was very good. Brian wore a navy suit to the hearing. His wife was not there. He did not, on the day of the plea, look at anyone in the courtroom. He looked at his shoes. On October 6th, Richard Voss settled his portion of the SEC matter for $14.2 million, a permanent bar from serving as an officer or director of any public company, and a 5-year industry suspension. The criminal case against him was, I understood, still open. Eleanor told me Richard would likely never go to prison. Eleanor also told me Richard had sold his apartment on Fifth Avenue on October 1st at a loss of approximately $3.4 million against the 2022 purchase price, and that his wife had filed for divorce on October 4th. He will be fine, Eleanor said, in the way that men like Richard are always fine. He will move to Florida. He will start a consulting firm. He will host a podcast. He will write a book about resilience. None of those things are prison. None of them are what he had on August weren't. She paused. He will, however, for the rest of his life, be the man this happened to. That is not nothing. On October 14th, in a small conference room at the SEC's New York office, I was awarded a whistleblower bounty under Dodd-Frank Section 922. The amount was sealed for 90 days and then made public, as the rules require. The number, when it came, was $9.3 million, representing 15% of the total recovered. After taxes and Eleanor's contingency, my net was a little under $4.8 million. I did not buy anything new. I did not move out of the one-bedroom on West 78th Street. I did, in December, fly my mother up from Florida and put her in a suite at the Carlyle for a long weekend, in part because she had never stayed in a hotel like the Carlyle, and in part because I had come to believe that suite and I had unfinished business. We had room service for breakfast. She asked me 3 times whether I was sure the eggs were not too expensive. I said I was sure. I was sure. The thing about a quiet victory, the thing nobody tells you, is that the absence of fireworks is not the same as the absence of feeling. The feeling arrives in pieces. It arrived for me on a Saturday morning in late October, in the produce section of the Fairway on Broadway, when I reached for a head of lettuce and realized that for the first time in 14 months, I was not, in some back corner of my mind, running a tally of what I had documented that week and where the copies were. It arrived again on a Tuesday in November, when I opened my laptop in a coffee shop and remembered I did not have to check the access logs on a data room that no longer existed. It arrived a third time on a Thursday in January, when I gave a talk at NYU Law School on compliance and corporate governance, and a second-year student, a young woman, 24, sharp-eyed, in a blazer one size too large, raised her hand and asked, "How did you know when to act?" I thought about it. I thought about Brian on the deck in East Hampton, the smile of a man who had never been told no. I thought about Richard's small toast with his amber drink. I thought about my own steady hand on the coffee cup, the napkin centered exactly under it, the phones I knew were filming, and the contact I knew was waiting. I didn't know when to act, I said. I knew when to prepare. The acting was the easy part. The preparing took 14 months and a lot of evenings I cannot get back. If you want my real advice, write everything down, keep your copies, be polite, be precise, be patient. And when the room finally turns, do not raise your voice. They never expect the woman who does not raise her voice. They expect the woman who cries or the woman who screams. They have a playbook for both. They do not have a playbook for the woman who simply, calmly, accurately, finally, opens her file. The room was quiet. After a moment, the student lowered her hand. She wrote something in her notebook. She was, I thought, going to be very good. I hoped, mildly and without any real anxiety, that someday she would not need to be. The Halberd story, when it finally settled in the press, was filed under governance failure and systemic risk, and the post-Dodd-Frank enforcement environment. My name appeared in 12 articles total. I gave one on-the-record interview to Annika Patel of the Journal in March after the criminal sentencings. We met at the same diner on Reed Street where Marcus had handed me the manila folder 7 months earlier. Connie poured my coffee. Annika asked good questions. I gave careful answers. The piece, when it ran, was titled simply "The Compliance Officer." My mother bought 12 copies. I never went back to 42nd floor private equity. I did not need to. In April, I opened a small advisory practice out of a sublet office in the Flatiron, 2 rooms, no view, the rent paid through the end of the year. I took on 3 clients, all of them women in compliance or general counsel seats at mid-cap firms who had read the journal piece and wanted, in their own quiet, careful way, to understand how to prepare. I charged what I was worth. I worked 4 days a week. On Fridays, I walked in Central Park. Sometimes walking the Reservoir Loop on a cold, bright morning in February, I think about Brian. Not often. He is, the last I heard, 3 months into a 40-month sentence at a federal facility in Pennsylvania. I do not wish him ill. I do not wish him well. He is to me a man I once met on a teak deck in East Hampton, who tried to take something from me in front of 40 people, and who succeeded only in giving me by accident the exact provocation I had been waiting 14 months to receive. He was right about one thing, that August afternoon, and only one. I had wanted to be at the senior table. I had wanted it very much for a very long time, and I had been, at the moment he said it, very close. It turned out the senior table was somewhere else entirely. I had simply needed to stand up with a steady hand and a coffee cup that did not shake and walk to it.